Hello, my name is Lucy. Welcome back to my channel. So I share videos on the topic of long COVID, chronic fatigue syndrome, and mind-body approaches. So today's video is an overview of what a mind-body approach is and different elements that are maybe involved. So this is just my own sort of idea on this. I'm sure there's other things I've missed out, and feel free to comment below if there's other things that you think are important in terms of a mind-body approach that I haven't covered. But also this is going to be a relatively short video, so I'm not intending to cover absolutely everything in it either. So I'm not a medical professional, and this isn't medical or mental health advice. This is just my ideas on a mind-body approach, given the things that I've read and also my own personal experience using a mind-body approach to help with long COVID, which for me was also diagnosed as chronic fatigue syndrome. So there's three elements that I think are really important to touch on. One is general mindset. The other is emotions. And I've got emotions in two categories: emotions that you're aware of and emotions that you're not aware of. And the third part is the nervous system. So for some people, this will not be new. You'll be really familiar with it, but I'm aware that there's a lot of people who haven't come across this approach before and for whom these terms are new. So to begin with, mindset in general with illness is really important. So when I was doing my master's thesis, it was on the topic of perceived control and self-efficacy. So perceived control means our own perception of the control that we have over a given situation. So we might not be in control, but however much control that we think we have is really important for our well-being and our health. And the other concept I just mentioned is self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is our belief in our ability to do something. So for instance, if you haven't driven before, a high self-efficacy would be that you believe that you're going to be able to do it. You believe that you're going to be able to learn how to drive and conquer that skill and become a good driver. So self-efficacy is actually really important, and until doing that master's thesis, I didn't really know a lot about it, but there are a huge number of studies correlating self-efficacy to positive health outcomes and good health in general and good well-being in general. So I'm not going to go into detail about those studies, but it makes a lot of sense that having a positive outlook, believing that you can improve your situation, is going to be helpful in general. So sometimes what people experience when they are unwell with a condition like chronic fatigue syndrome or long COVID is a sense of feeling like something really awful has happened to them that's out of their control. And this is completely natural and understandable. And for some people, that means they end up taking on a sort of a victim mentality. And it might be just one part of them that takes on that victim mentality, because in many ways you are a victim in the situation where something really awful has happened and you are left to deal with the consequences. And with these conditions, unfortunately, there's not a lot of medical help. So we can feel like a victim to the system. We can be dismissed, which can make people feel like a victim. And those feelings are very valid. So I'm in no way saying kind of push that feeling down and don't think about it. If you notice that part of you feels this sense of being a victim, I suppose allow that part to express the fact that it feels like it's been a victim and what's happened and why it's so unfair. But if that part is really dominant, it could get in the way of you moving forward, because essentially having a mindset where you believe that you can make progress and that you have some control over your situation is going to be really, really helpful. So, and many people have a very strong sense of, I'm going to do whatever I can to help myself. And they are trying really, really hard. And I applaud anyone who's in this situation who has been trying and trying and trying, because it's not easy, especially when you've tried a number of things and they haven't worked. It takes energy and persistence to pick yourself up again and try something else. And with this particular approach, it's worth a try. You know, there's not a lot of research on it. There's much more research on this area around chronic pain. And for me, just finding that research was really helpful, because it helped me realize how powerful this can be for people with unexplained symptoms. And so I think our mindset in general is going to have a big impact, because if we're feeling like a victim in the situation, naturally we're going to feel really low, we're going to feel anxious, we'll have thoughts about things being out of our control. Whereas if we feel as though there's something that I can do to help myself, it puts the control back in our corner, and we can feel like maybe not everything's in our control, but we can control our response to this situation, and we can take action, even if that action is in small steps. There is a way that we can start moving forward. So the second point I wanted to touch on was emotions. So just in case anyone doesn't know what an emotion is, I'll explain. An emotion is a very simple explanation. It's a one word feeling to describe what's going on for us at the moment. So for instance, feeling excited, happy, frustrated, hopeless, sad, upset. And often emotions come up in our body. So when we feel excited, you might feel like an opening or an openness in your chest. If you're feeling anxious, you might feel butterflies in your stomach or knots in your stomach. You might feel like your whole body is really tense and your muscles are contracting. If you are feeling fearful or sad, you might have a sort of a sinking feeling in your stomach. So it's different for different people, but it is helpful to think about the fact that emotions do come up in our body. So firstly, I'm going to talk about emotions that we are aware of. So when people experience an illness that is unexplained and has no end date, then it is naturally going to bring up a huge amount of fear and concern. So the fact that it's unexplained means that we don't know. Often we're in a situation where we don't know why the symptom is there. We don't know what the symptom means. Could it be something serious? How long is it going to last for? Is this going to last forever? When is this going to go away? Are common thoughts that might be running through our mind. And I think it would be very hard for anyone not to feel fear in a situation of having a condition like long COVID or chronic fatigue syndrome, because it's naturally a really, really difficult experience to go through, and there's a huge amount of uncertainty. So we also could doubt that what we're doing is helpful. We could doubt that we're going to get better. We could doubt specific approaches, because we might find it hard to trust what's going to work, what's not going to work. And for many people, they're aware of this fear. For some people, they're not. They also might be aware of other emotions that come up, which are very natural, like feeling hopeless, helpless, sad, upset, frustrated, angry, a sense of loss. So having these emotions come up are very natural, and I think part of this work is allowing yourself to experience those emotions. So rather than trying to push them aside, giving yourself time to feel them or write about them or process them in the best way that you can. And so one of the challenges with a condition like this is that with that fear and the doubt that comes up, it can create a cycle where anytime a symptom is worse, anytime we get a new symptom, our sense of fear rises, maybe a feeling of doubt comes over us as well. But being in a state of fear means the body can't fully relax, and we can't get into a sort of a relaxed state for the healing to occur or for us to start to be able to make progress physically. And this cycle is very common, and if you're in this cycle, it's not your fault. It's not that you're not doing enough. It is a natural cycle that just will happen. But the more you can become aware of it, the more you can notice the fear and notice the doubt. And this specifically is for people who have a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome, long COVID, or chronic pain of some kind that's medically unexplained. So if you have not yet been to a doctor about a symptom that seems very scary, it is a good idea to get checked out and to rule out anything else that could be causing that symptom. For instance, I had quite a lot of chest pain on the left side of my chest, and of course that was really fear-inducing because I didn't know what was going on, and it was there for a long time. It came and it went. Sometimes it could be quite severe. And so I have had so many checks, cardiac checks now, and I have been told there's nothing wrong with my blood tests, there's nothing wrong with my other tests that have been done to explain the symptoms. Therefore, it is long COVID or is chronic fatigue syndrome. And having that reassurance from a doctor often doesn't feel very reassuring when you're unwell. It feels, sometimes it can feel quite difficult to hear that there's nothing wrong. But having that means that this approach is easier to try and easier to get on board with, because we can notice that when we're fearing a particular symptom, that if we've already had that checked out by the doctor and they've told us it's one of the symptoms of long COVID or it's one of the symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome, then it's easier to notice that that is just fear and that this symptom is unexplained, and therefore it could be created by some of the emotions going on or some of the emotions that you're not aware of going on. So the second part around emotions is emotions that you might not be aware of. So one of the reasons that I didn't actually relate to this approach very much for quite a long time was because I didn't always feel anxious, and I didn't always feel, I couldn't see a very specific pattern between my emotions and my symptoms. So it wasn't clear, and it meant that I didn't really relate to some of that fear cycle that I've explained. So of course that did come up for me at times, but at other times it didn't, and so it didn't fully match my experience. And so reading Dr. John Sarno's book, The Mindbody Prescription, was very helpful for me, because I could really identify with the idea that there were emotions that I was unaware of and that I wasn't processing. And so I started to try to dig a little bit deeper anytime I had a symptom to try and see if there was an emotion underneath that symptom or a part of me that was feeling a specific way. And this idea of repressed emotions could be there for many people, or could come up in different scenarios in life other than having this specific illness. So one example that I can look back on is when I was doing exams. There were sometimes I did exams and I definitely did notice the anxiety, but there was one particular time that I had a number of exams over the course of a couple of weeks, and I didn't feel anxious. I knew I had a reason to feel anxious, but I just didn't feel anxious. But I didn't sleep. So I was getting about 2 hours sleep every night. And it was a strange experience because I could see what was going on, that obviously I wasn't sleeping because there was my body wasn't relaxed, therefore I was anxious, but somehow it wasn't really fully becoming conscious. I knew I should be anxious about the exams. I had reason to be anxious because of course I didn't want to fail, but it just wasn't, I just didn't feel it. So that's an example for me when a symptom just went straight into my body. I also sometimes would get symptoms of IBS during exams, and again, it's sort of that anxiety going into our body and generating symptoms. There's other examples, like when we get embarrassed, our face might go red. When we get nervous, we might get butterflies in our stomach. And sometimes in those cases, we're aware that we feel embarrassed, or we're aware that we feel anxious. So this is an area to explore if you feel like you're not entirely able to connect your emotions to the symptoms. It might be worth trying to become better aware of what might be beneath the surface. And there's different ways of doing this. I've shared in other videos how I did it and what helped for me. A specific approach called internal family systems helped me. It looks at different parts of ourselves, and by breaking it into parts, it means that you're asking yourself, does any part of me feel a little bit anxious? Does any part of me feel angry? Because it might not be, other parts might not feel anxious. They might not feel angry. They might not even believe that you should feel angry in this situation. So that was a way that helped me uncover emotions that I previously wasn't aware of. So the third part that I wanted to cover was the nervous system. So the nervous system is really important in keeping us healthy and also keeping us emotionally regulated. And there's different states that our nervous system can be in. So according to the polyvagal theory, there's 3 states. One is a ventral vagal state. So this is when we feel connected and relaxed and emotionally regulated. So often this is when we're feeling happy, when we're connecting with people in a situation where you feel good. Then the next one is a sympathetic nervous system state. So this is a state where we're mobilized for action. So often it's called a fight or flight state, and it basically just means that our body senses a threat where we're feeling anxious or we're feeling fearful, which makes us ready to fight or run away from the threat. And this is an important state because if, for instance, you were crossing the road and you hadn't looked properly and all of a sudden you noticed a car coming, your body would very quickly get into this sympathetic state or this fight or flight state, and your muscles would contract quickly. I'm pretty sure your pupils actually change as well, but there's a number of different physiological changes that happen in order for you to quickly move and get out of the way of that situation. People notice sometimes when they're feeling anxious that their heart rate is going up or that their breathing rate is increasing, and this is a sign that you're in a fight or flight state or this sympathetic state. And as I said, it's a helpful state, it's important for our survival, but if you're chronically in that state, then it's likely that our bodies won't be relaxing in a way that's going to help with symptoms. So the third state is called, or the third system is called the dorsal vagal system. And this is a shutdown or an immobilization state where our body essentially goes into shutdown because there's a sense of threat. So it's a bit like a rabbit freezing because of a threat. And a lot of people talk about this being very relevant to conditions like chronic fatigue syndrome or long COVID, that our body has essentially gone into this state of shutdown. And this sense of shutdown is one of the challenges, for some people, a really big challenge in terms of getting back to good health and being able to do more. And for some people, a shutdown state is more natural for them when a threat comes about. So if when you were a child and something bad happened, like you fell off a bike or you were emotionally upset and you went to your parents or your caregiver for support, if they were able to help you with regulating your emotions by giving you presence and a sense of calm reassurance and sort of a calm energy, essentially they were able to be with emotion in a regulated way, then you would have grown up to have that regulated nervous system. For other people, where their caregivers, for whatever reason, weren't able to provide that for them, they grew up in a state where they didn't learn how to regulate their nervous system themselves. And when I say learn, it's not a conscious learning exercise. It's a sort of a subconscious thing that we would naturally do. And for some people, because they didn't have that regulation as a child, they are more likely to be in the sympathetic or the dorsal vagal state when a threat happens. And it also might depend on the scenario, it might depend on the situation and how big the threat is, whether it's a really big trauma that's happened in your life or whether it's something stressful that for many people, like for example, the pandemic for many people was incredibly stressful because there was a lot of fear in general and it was a complete change to people's routines and people felt out of control with what was happening. So it is very understandable why our bodies would go into a shutdown state when we get an illness like this, also because it's somewhat self-compounded in the sense that what I've mentioned before, having an illness like this is very stressful. It makes us kind of go into a survival mode because losing such a huge amount of capacity to do functional things in your life, or feeling like you might being fearful that you might lose your job, or not be able to spend time with your children, not parent your children, not care for your children or other people around you, and take on the normal responsibilities you have in day-to-day life, is a really difficult experience to go through, and understandably causes a lot of stress and puts us in that survival mode. So overall, our mindset, whether that's having perceived control over our situation or a victim mindset, our emotions, whether they're emotions we're aware of or emotions we're unaware of, and the state of our nervous system all play a big role in terms of how the mind and the body are connected. And hopefully the more you can notice the connection between your mind and your body, the more that you can find this approach helpful, the more it makes sense, and the more you notice how it applies to you. And this video mightn't have fully explained exactly how it applies to you, because everyone's situation is quite different and there are nuances. But hopefully it's given you an overview of what a mind-body approach is in terms of looking at the different elements involved, and also certain things that you can reflect on in terms of your own situation and how you feel you're managing, or your outlook on your situation. And a lot of this is a protective response. So for some people, I notice that they say that they are really struggling with the fear. For other people, they're struggling with the motivation and the sense of shutdown involved with this experience. And often the reason the fear is there or the shutdown is there is because our body is in some type of protection mode, or part of us is trying to protect us. And so that can be helpful in terms of having more self-compassion, because all of these processes, even though some of them are unhelpful in terms of getting better, like having a lot of fear, the fear is there because part of you wants you to be safe and wants to protect you. And when we can reflect that actually that's what's going on, it can help with moving forward as well, because self-compassion can be really helpful. So I hope this video has been helpful. I know it's not new information for some people who are in the Facebook group. And if you're not in the Facebook group and you'd like to join, there's a link in the description below. And if you have any questions, if you have any comments of things that you'd like to add to what I've said, please leave a comment below. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks for listening.